She married a prince for a fairy tale life, but one hidden past turned her wedding night into a nightmare no one saw coming. The Dubai skyline glowed like a diamond crown against the night as the kind of luxury most people only see in movies unfolded inside the most extravagant ballroom the city had ever built. A place dripping with gold accents, high ceilings painted with actual constellations, and chandeliers that sparkled brighter than paparazzi flashbulbs. Because this wasn't just any wedding, it was the celebration of Prince Faris Al Rahman, young Saudi billionaire with a reputation for flexing his wealth like it was a sport, and he had finally chosen a bride, Lena Patel, an Indian-born model turned influencer who skyrocketed to fame with flawless photo shoots, a mysterious background, and a fan base obsessed with her glamorous transformation. Guests at the wedding included celebrities, oil tycoons, royal cousins flown in on private jets, and influencers desperate for clout, all sipping champagne imported from places most people can't even pronounce. While servers in diamond brooches carried trays stacked with gold-coated roses and desserts worth more than the average rent back in the States, and even though everyone smiled like they were living inside a fairy tale, tiny whispers followed Lena everywhere she stepped, questioning who she used to be before she became the princess of luxury. But Faris ignored the gossip, soaking up every ounce of attention, glowing in custom-tailored designer fashion, showing off a wedding ring so massive people joked it needed its own passport. And photographers captured every second like the world was watching history. But underneath all the sparkle and hype, there was something darker pulsing through the night, an energy that didn't match the carefully curated perfection. Because behind the velvet curtains, security cameras locked onto every movement. Faris's bodyguard Omar kept an eye on Lena like she was a security threat instead of a bride, and somewhere in the crowd, unknown eyes studied the couple like they already knew this marriage wouldn't survive past midnight, as if the gold-plated fairy tale was just a ticking bomb waiting to explode when the truth finally crashed the party. Once the fireworks faded and the press left the building, the fairy tale vibe died fast, as Faris and Lena were escorted by security through a private elevator into a high-security penthouse suite, stacked with marble floors, velvet walls, and a panoramic view of Dubai that would make a billionaire feel small. But the moment the door locked behind them, Faris's charm evaporated into raw suspicion, because earlier that evening, his phone buzzed with files he wasn't supposed to see. Screenshots of Lena partying in underground nightclubs back in Mumbai, a few messy tabloid articles hinting at a toxic ex, and old modeling gigs that were a little too risque for royal standards. And with every swipe, Faris's ego curdled into anger as he convinced himself she played him, lied to him, embarrassed him in front of the world by hiding a past he believed was unfit for royalty. And while Lena tried to keep things calm, soft smiles, shaky hands adjusting her expensive jewelry, Faris paced the room like a storm without a leash, throwing accusations without a single word actually being spoken. The tension so thick even the gold-plated decor couldn't distract from the rage boiling under his designer suit. And out in the hallway, Omar the bodyguard stood like a statue, but his nerves were on fire because he heard the thud of objects being thrown, a muffled cry. Furniture cracked against the wall. It wasn't his first time witnessing the prince lose control, but something about tonight felt different. Like a point of no return had been crossed, and the cameras didn't catch what happened inside that suite because Faris knew exactly where blind spots were located, a detail only someone with power could manipulate. So while the world thought the prince and his bride were consummating their luxury union, a much darker reality was unfolding behind soundproof walls, where jealousy and pride collided into violence, and the same hands that slid a giant diamond ring onto a bride hours earlier were now holding a phone filled with secrets that would turn a wedding night into a nightmare with no witnesses except the guilt already building in Omar's chest as he stared at a door he was too afraid to open. Hours dragged into the darkest part of the night, and by the time silence finally filled the penthouse, the fairy tale wedding had transformed into a crime scene hiding behind locked doors. Because Lena's body lay crumpled on the cold marble floor, her luxurious wedding gown torn at the shoulder and stained with panic, her makeup smeared into a haunting reminder that she fought desperately until the very last second. and Ferris stood over her in complete denial, chest heaving, fists still trembling like his rage hadn't fully drained out yet. But instead of calling for real help, he grabbed his phone and dialed Omar, the one person who always cleaned up the messes money couldn't erase. And when Omar rushed in, his heart nearly stopped at the sight of the bride who hours earlier smiled under diamond lights, now lifeless like a shattered porcelain doll whose story ended too fast, and Ferris insisted it was an accident, slurring excuses about a fall, a fight, too much alcohol, claiming she slipped and he tried to help her up, but the story cracked just like the shattered crystal vase lying nearby. And Omar knew he was staring at the truth no one would ever dare to speak aloud. So while Ferris stumbled into another room to splash water on his guilt, Omar moved with robotic precision, wiping fingerprints off glossy surfaces, tossing broken shards into a trash bag, straightening furniture that would have exposed chaos to any outsider. And for a moment he hesitated, his conscience screaming louder than the pounding in his chest. But loyalty trained into him drowned every whisper of humanity, forcing him to protect a prince who didn't deserve protection. And when Ferris returned demanding silence, demanding that Lena's death disappear like a deleted file, Omar nodded even though fear burned through him like acid. Because he knew the truth. Royalty can afford everything except consequences. And as hotel staff remained clueless floors below, one bride's last breath vanished into a golden prison high above Dubai, leaving only security footage of Ferris leaving the suite with a blank face that hinted nothing except dark history had just been made. News didn't waste a second before exploding across social media like wildfire, because a bride dying on her wedding night wasn't something the internet could ignore, especially when that bride had millions of followers and a fan base that treated her like a rising queen. And the moment rumors leaked that her husband was Saudi royalty, global attention sharpened into a spotlight too bright for anyone to escape. So while Ferris hid behind his family's tight security and the hotel issued a suspiciously vague statement about an unfortunate incident, the United States government stepped in fast. Since Lena still had legal ties to America, and nobody in the U.S. was going to let a high-profile death slide away quietly, especially when the world's richest elites were involved, which is how Detective Maria Alvarez, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, landed in Dubai looking like she already knew someone was lying, backed by Dr. Reese Collins, a brilliant American forensic specialist who treated power like it was invisible. And together they walked into that penthouse suite with a determination that cut through the room sharper than any blade, instantly noticing things that didn't add up, the scattered petals that hid broken glass, the fresh scratches on the wall that someone tried to wipe away, the bruises on Lena's body that screamed struggle and pain, and the missing camera footage from the hallway outside the suite, which practically begged the question, who deleted it and why? While the prince's legal team scrambled to protect him, demanding privacy, trying to block access to evidence, acting like money could buy time, yet every stall only made Alvarez more suspicious. And when she saw Ferris surrounded by lawyers yet refusing to meet her eyes, she recognized the look of a man terrified of the truth getting out. Because even royalty can't hide from science. Blood tells stories no one can rewrite. And Dr. Collins collected every sample like he was building a timeline that would eventually expose every second of that night, while global media circled like sharks, each headline slicing deeper into the royal facade, making it clear that the bigger the name, the harder the world was ready to drag it through the dirt. While Ferris continued to hide behind royal lawyers and armored gates, Omar Khalid found himself sitting in a stark interrogation room that felt colder than any palace hallway he had ever guarded, and as the hours dragged on, his nerves cracked faster than he expected, because he wasn't built to withstand global heat or the guilt burning through his chest every time he pictured Lena's lifeless body on that marble floor. And Detective Maria Alvarez could see it all over him, the tapping foot, the trembling fingers, the eyes that kept avoiding hers, signs of a man who knew more than he wanted to. So she pressed harder, reminding him that no amount of loyalty could bring the bride back or erase what the world was already suspecting. And Omar tried at first to stick to the rehearsed version the royals drilled into him, saying it was an accident, just a tragic fall, nothing more. But Dr. Reese Collins slid photos across the table showing Lena's bruises. The pattern of force that wasn't random, the shattered vase cleaned too perfectly, and a timeline that simply didn't match the prince's story. And with each piece of evidence stacked in front of him, Omar's facade crumbled until he finally confessed that Faris had exploded into rage after being sent a digital folder exposing Lena's past life as if it were a crime. And Omar admitted he heard the fight escalate, the screams, the thuds. But he froze outside the door because opening it could have meant losing his career, his freedom, maybe even his life if he interfered with royalty. And tearfully he explained how Faris called him in afterward, ordering him to clean everything, threatening him with consequences he didn't dare test. But he insisted he never touched Lena, never laid a hand on her, only tried to erase the prince's dirty work. And Alvarez leaned in. Realizing Omar wasn't the monster, just another pawn terrified of the king he served, yet still guilty of helping hide the truth, because silence can be a weapon just as deadly as fists. And now with his testimony recorded, the walls protecting Faris began to crack, proving that even the most loyal bodyguard eventually chooses survival over secrets. As the investigation intensified and every news outlet from New York to London shoved Faris's face onto their front pages, his carefully guarded life began to crumble faster than his legal team could spin excuses. Because while Dubai authorities tried to shield their prized billionaire from public humiliation, the United States wasn't backing down, and Detective Maria Alvarez kept pushing forward like a force that didn't understand the word stop. And Faris, once the Golden Prince adored for his wealth and status, was now a global villain hiding in a mansion surrounded by security cameras and panic, his arrogance shaken by the reality that money couldn't silence forensic science, especially not when Dr. Reese Collins pieced together every bruise on Lena's body and traced them back to violent, blunt force trauma that no court could dismiss as a harmless fall. And as the truth sharpened into a blade that threatened to sever every privilege Faris ever abused, paparazzi swarmed airports, royals scrambled to control the narrative, and social media turned into a digital funeral for Lena, millions demanding justice with hashtags that wouldn't die down, putting Faris under a spotlight hotter than the Dubai desert sun. And every time he stepped outside, cameras flashed like snares ready to trap him, turning his once confident stride into a paranoid shuffle, while his family pressured politicians to bury the scandal, calling in favors, shutting doors, trying to erase the story by blaming Lena's past or mental state. But the evidence refused to bend, and Omar's confession shattered the prince's golden shield, leaving Faris cornered by both legal wrath and worldwide disgust, because no matter how high the walls of his palace reached, public fury climbed higher. And when the government finally agreed under international pressure to move forward with charges, Faris's world flipped from privilege to panic, his wealth suddenly useless against a timeline that proved he had destroyed the woman he vowed to love. And with every headline screaming his guilt, he realized too late that kings only stay untouchable, until someone finds the courage and the proof to drag them down to the ground, right when everyone thought the case was straightforward and Faris would go down. As the violent prince who murdered his bride out of pure jealousy, a curveball dropped that flipped the narrative on its head and made the whole investigation way messier than anyone expected. Because digital forensics uncovered that the files exposing Lena's past didn't magically appear on Faris's phone, but were sent by someone with deep pockets and a very personal grudge. A former American businessman named Ethan Ward, who once funded Lena's early modeling career and fell obsessively in love with her, believing she owed him not just loyalty, but her entire future. So when she rejected him and chose a royal life instead, Ethan's ego cracked like glass, and he dedicated himself to destroying her wedding night with the exact kind of dirt that would drive a pride-fueled billionaire into a deadly rage. And while Ethan didn't throw a punch or step inside that hotel suite, he manipulated the night like a puppet master, pushing Faris's insecurities to explode violently, turning jealousy into a weapon designed to kill without his fingerprints. And when the FBI exposed that mastermind twist, Faris's defense tried to shift blame, claiming he was provoked, emotionally ambushed. But the evidence didn't erase the fact that Lena's bruises came from his hands, nor did it soften the horror of her final moments. So Ethan ended up arrested for digital harassment, blackmail, and conspiracy, his empire crumbling just as fast as Ferris's freedom vanished, leading to Omar's partial redemption as his cooperation earned a lighter sentence, though nightmares would forever remind him of the bride he couldn't save. And as for Ferris, the prince who once floated on wealth and worship found himself waking up in a high-security cell surrounded not by gold, but concrete, stripped of titles, allies, and the invincible aura he always believed he carried. While the world mourned Lena Patel as more than an influencer, but a symbol of how power, obsession, and secrets can twist love into tragedy, and her story lived on through documentaries, court records, and millions of voices demanding justice long after the castle walls fell on those who thought they were untouchable.